there. How are you today? I'm Dr. Alana, your friendly trauma psychiatrist, coming to you for another episode of Demystifying Mental Health. We are going to have a really important discussion today. And this discussion hinges around the things that are happening in our society today. Protecting your sanity in a constitutional crisis. Come on. Protecting your sanity in a constitutional crisis. I have heard from many of my doctor friends, not just psychiatrists, but people in all various practices that are going through a lot of emotions and a lot of stress surrounding the state of American politics. And we know that because America has historically been a leader in democracy in the world, that this affects people all over the globe. And so I was like, who can I talk to? Who can help us have a useful conversation about this? And the first person that came to mind is one of my good friends, Dr. Dawn Brown, who is not only a fantastic double board certified child and adolescent and sports psychiatrist, but she's an ADHD expert and the owner of ADHD Wellness Center and Mental Healthletics, where she helps athletes at all levels be their best selves. She's even licensed in 7 states, so she's able to take care of people across the United States, and she's going to lend us her expertise. So, with no further ado, we will bring in Dr. Dawn Brown.
Dr. Alana, thank you.
Hey, girl,
Thank
hey.
you. Hey, girl, hey. It is a blessing to be in this space with you and share this space with you, the baddest trauma psychiatrist I know.
I mean, the only one should be because it's
Come
trademarked,
on,
but
come on. You better say it. No,
but
but thank you,
thank you
thank
so much.
you, thank you, sis, for having me. It's really an honor to be here. I think this is such an important topic. It hits home to my heart, and it's something that I'm advocating in the moment as well. So I appreciate you thinking of me to be here today with you.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
before we get started, I'm just going to take a pause and breathe. That's such an important mechanism for where we are in life, such an important
Hmm.
coping skill to just take momentary pauses
Amen.
and breathe and reset ourselves. Now,
Yeah.
now that we have done that, we need to talk about political trauma. And like, what is that, right? So many people have been reaching out, like, are you looking at this? They're sending me these. I don't know about you, I'm being bombarded with videos and inbox stuff about all the things that are happening. And while I appreciate people thinking of me and, wanting to keep me informed, it also feels a lot like a constant, a fire hose, maybe,
Mhm. Oh
of
yeah,
negative information. So
yeah.
what are you hearing? Because you're in clinical practice. I'm in a little bit
Mhm.
of different space with education and consulting. Tell me
Mhm.
what you're hearing from people about how they're feeling these days.
To be forthcoming, people are not doing well these days. We know that political stress definitely has a direct impact on the psychological system, right? And it's the emotional system as well. So it's the psychological distress, emotional conflict that stem from direct or indirect impact of societal norms, policies, politics, all those things. And so I, as you mentioned, I'm licensed in different states. And so, one of my main kind of patient pool is in California. So they're dealing still with the firefighters, the fires and how that's impacting them and the displacement and the trauma of losing everything, memorabilia and, their family members. I have a patient that their family member was lost in the wildfire. And then you talk about global events, the war in Gaza. You talk about just how everyday human just being and everyday
Mhm.
stress that we get. just from the day to day and our interaction and engagements with certain systems and social norms that have been created. So, political trauma is really making a major impact. And then you have something that, like a TV or phone, where we are feeding, we're being fed information. And so,
Mhm.
that is stressful too. And I'm glad you had us breathe because, I tell my patients, when you're in therapy, it's good to go through because there's another side of through is out. And so when you're talking about these things, it's going to make you feel it. So thank you for that
Mhm.
breathing exercise because I know we're getting into that I'm already feeling it, right? But that's kind of what people feel just on a norm. But think about all the discrimination, the oppression, the forced displacement, the wars, direct or indirect, that we're looking and hearing and seeing. So I mean,
Mhm.
we're on multiple levels,
Sure.
multiple levels.
And I want to give a definition of political trauma because it always,
Yes,
burns me up when people say, like, I'm not into politics. And I'm like, politics, the base of the word politics is people.
that's
It
right.
is the power of the people. So when laws are put into effect that you
Mhm.
have to live by, whether you vote in an election or not, you are
That's
impacted by politics. So politics does you, even if you don't do politics.
Oh,
And
yes, it
now I
is.
think that that is very much in people's faces.
Mm.
So when we talk about political trauma, it does not have to be someone touching you to create trauma. This is a really, really important concept. It is actions that are taken that cause intense fear, that
Mhm.
cause uncertainty, loss of safety, or loss of authenticity and freedom, which keeps your body system in a state of overdrive for an extended period of time. So I'm sure that, when we read history books and we do our history lessons at school, they talk about, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the
Mhm.
Reconstruction and Civil Rights era. But what they don't often talk about is the trauma that those individuals were going through in real time. We learn the historic dates, we learn the names, but we
Yeah.
often don't think about how uncertain and unsettling it would be to be a Black Panther and have the FBI investigating you, or to be, a civil rights leader, or even to be Abraham Lincoln trying to lead a divided America. These are the concept of trauma is such a pervasive concept that I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking about all these different things that cause trauma. But I
Yes.
boil it down to this: a traumatic experience is anything that changes the way you think about yourself, other people, and the rest of the world in a
Mhm.
negative way.
That's
And
right.
in the moment, you may not even realize that you're experiencing trauma, but your brain does. And
Mhm.
your brain is being programmed by those experiences. So even down the road, if you don't actively remember it, that's okay.
Mhm.
Your primitive brain systems have recorded it for you. That's why we talk about the body keeps score, right?
That's right. Exactly.
So, Doc,
Exactly.
we have, it's kind of hard to even think about where to start when
Mhm.
we are talking about the level of historic ridiculousness that Black people have gone through, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I think for me, I go back to slavery,
Mhm.
that we have not addressed the psychological trauma of what it means for a particular group of people to put any other group of people in bondage, right?
Right.
We think about, okay, we know that Black people and African people went through hell getting over here in them boats and
Right.
kidnapped and taken from their land. The Native Americans went through hell with it being forced from their lands and their ways of life and things like that. And we even built schools that indoctrinated people, and we used force.
Mhm.
Sometimes they called it religion or whatever, however, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
Psychological force and trauma,
Mhm.
and often physical force
Right.
and trauma. and we think about the trauma that is imparted to the oppressed community, but what about the damage that it would do to the people who are doing the oppressing? Can we talk about that for a minute?
Ooh,
Like
yes.
what kind of psychological damage would come from being a group of people who have to worry about the consequences of oppressing another group of people?
Ooh, flip that one. So
Hmm.
when we talk about the oppressed, you're talking about the oppressor or the
I'm talking
oppressed?
about the oppressor. Why? Like, okay, we're gonna use
So, for
black and
example,
white,
you
but we
want to
know
use
it's
a police
deeper than
officer,
that.
for example? You want to do a police officer? Yeah. So, when we talk about what's interesting is that we often have a phrase that's similar to what goes around comes around, or things happen in cycles, right? And when I've interviewed policemen as a patient, as just a media influencer, many of them have openly admitted. And I'm just talking about a policeman, so I'm not saying that they're all bad and things of that nature. I think
Right.
that's just a good for as a black
Example.
people and
Mhm.
historically how we've been oppressed in certain different ways. I'm just using them as an example of role. But many of them became policemen because they were traumatized. Okay. And so the idea of being in control, that's where people want to be. That's it can be human nature, because let's just say I need to control my day. I need to control where I need to be, who needs to be there. If anything disrupts it, I mean, I maybe get a little frazzled sometimes, still working on that. But let's just talk about basic control, right? And so when you're talking about positioning and roles and fear of not having control, what does that look like? And so for
Mhm.
the oppressor, and if you think about white American men, when have they ever been oppressed?
Well, I mean,
Right?
I
I mean,
think
there,
some of
there's
them
some
would
situations,
argue that when things don't go their way, they feel oppressed
right?
for sure
And
because
let's
of the
mhm,
position of privilege.
right. The
Mhm.
skin for protection is what some people have called it. And that's just the basis of the foundation of American principles our Constitution has been built upon,
Yeah.
right?
And
I mean,
yeah, it's really striking to me. And again, we know that there are exceptions to
of
rules.
course,
I want people
of
to
course,
think
of course,
of this in a broader, we're trying to have a nuanced conversation with
right.
the limitation of words. But I think what's the important part is to think about, in order to um, deprive other people of their rights,
Hmm.
to keep them when they want to go somewhere,
Hmm.
to take advantage of their bodies, sell their
Hmm.
children, ignore their
Hmm.
tears,
Hmm.
uh, and live in a society that is constructed that way. You have to ignore emotions, you have to
Right.
downplay them, you have to
Hmm.
not value them, and you certainly can't exercise empathy to its fullest. Empathy being putting yourself in the other person's shoes and perspective and actually allowing their version of reality to be equal to yours. Because if
Right.
you did that, you wouldn't be able to do the messed up thing that you about to do to this other person.
That is true. But it's interesting. And what I was going to say is that in interviewing these individuals, and some individuals who have had traumatic past, what I come to find out is that yes, they're easier to compartmentalize, but
Mhm.
in those moments, they project or displace many of those emotions that they wildly feel
Mhm.
onto the other person.
Other
Now, could
person.
that be because they've been mistreated by someone else, or someone that reminds them of the person that they're oppressing? Or is
Mhm.
this from daddy who was never? So there's different fascinating, interesting like ways of how they've been able to understand that and come to that
Yeah.
and heal from that. And so, yes, you're exactly right, Alana. I feel that the oppressor in general, yes, they have to have the ability to compartmentalize because they're human. So they have
Mhm.
emotions. They have
Mhm.
emotions. But
Mhm.
some of them, if they have like a disorder that causes them to not necessarily be empathetic, like a narcissist, for example, or
Yeah.
antisocial or sociopath, yeah, I can definitely understand. But I'm talking about the regular person that's oppressing. they have the ability to compartmentalize and then also project and displace what they've actually experienced onto another person, and it's shared. I often find it is
Let me
shared from a shared community sense, so it's okay. You see what I'm
let me
saying?
yeah, let me put a bow on that, um, and try to make it plain. We American culture is mostly based in what white American dominant male psyche has been for so long that we have perpetuated a culture of ignoring emotions. We've
Mm-hmm.
perpetuated a culture of not recognizing when greed and fear and anger and hatred and judgment of others is driving the person's decision making. So now we look up
Yep.
250 or so years in, and the people who are the most separated from the average experience of an everyday person are the folks that are managed to get the most money and to become in charge. It
Right.
kind of makes sense that
Mm-hmm.
in a way it
Exactly right.
protects this idea. And I remember in medical school in 2003, Baylor had just wrapped up the human genome, the first
Mm-hmm.
big announcements of the Human Genome Project. And there were, Dawn and I both attended Baylor College of Medicine,
Yeah.
which is an excellent institution and was a part of the consortium of research institutions
Mm-hmm.
that accomplished this task of looking at the human DNA and the entire human genome. And I remember being struck by, and this is not as emphasized as it used to be, and maybe it's because of the timing of when I went through school, but they really emphasize that there's no such thing scientifically as human race. There's one race, we're one species, right? The definition
Right.
of species is that you can successfully mate with and have offspring who survive. That is a species. And
Mm-hmm.
that this concept of race, the way we use it in black and white, is why it's so confusing because it don't exist.
Exactly. Yes. It does
We
not.
are genetically 99.9% the same.
Can
And
you say
then
that again, please, for the back part?
genetically, I know how, and listen, I believe in Black power and the beauty of our DNA and our melanin and all the beautiful things that make us too. So don't get me wrong, Black culture, the ethnicity of African American people who have descended from our original ancestors on this planet that spread out all
Mm-hmm.
across the globe to populate humanity. It came
Mm-hmm.
from Mother Africa. But
Yes.
we got to have the real conversation that the concept of thinking that there's mixed races or that there's any race or physical characteristic that can make one human in any way supreme or higher than another is a mental illness.
Yes, it
And
is.
it's a delusional
And
state.
a political warfare, right? I mean, it's politicized. It's a politicized term. I mean, it was used in politics, right? Exactly.
And
And
continues to
so
be.
it continues to be.
We
You're
just had
exactly
somebody
right.
say, I
Yeah.
forgot the name of the guy who said that competent white men should be in charge. One it's
Who said
somebody
that?
in the cabinet, I believe, that said that
Right.
recently.
I'm like, what? What does that mean? I mean, I know
Well,
what it means, but really.
but I do
So
think
you're
that that's
questioning my race of not being competent. That's what you're
I
saying.
was not at like, what
And
does the word competent mean to you?
to me, it means
Mhm.
having the ability to do your job well and basically safeguard it, right? To where the fulfillment is being met, the goal is being met and
Mhm.
fulfilled. And having the background education experience on providing that goal or that task, that service, and
Right.
being competent, being in your right mind, right?
So
And
a skill
so,
set that you say you in order to be competent, you have to
right,
have a educational or information base,
uh huh,
and you have to be able to carry that out physically or psychologically, depending on what your job is. As
mm-hmm,
long as the goals are met, that is competency.
right,
So I think it's really important because we still live in this society, and this is still about political trauma because even the messages that we receive about ourselves gives a automatic concept of something about the way you look having
Mm-hmm.
something to do with your ability to have a knowledge base and
Mm-hmm.
connect it to a skill set.
Mm-hmm.
That is really important because any human being of any ethnicity, background, birthplace, religion, psychological, whatever, if they have
Mm-hmm.
their needs met and they are provided with food and education and shelter, they can be healthy and well. But we live in a society that still has micro-engineered poverty, discrimination.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
putting with
Oppression,
executive
violence,
orders,
justice.
yeah, with executive orders, they're putting discrimination back into our day-to-day experience. And that in and of itself is dehumanizing and
Yes.
stigmatizing and traumatizing. I just
Yes,
wanted
it
to
is.
validate that for people who may be like, you're LGBTQ and you're like, I don't, what is happening? You're from an immigrant family and you're feeling internal strain. It's very
Mm-hmm.
real that those are traumas and that it makes sense that you feel that. Any thoughts on that, Dr.
Exactly.
Dawn?
Yes, I mean you hit it. Divisive rhetoric, propaganda, forced displacement that many of our American sisters and brothers or non-American sisters and brothers are feeling that are here, discrimination, oppression, societal and within our societal norms. And I also want to say that it can be direct but also indirect. So yes, the war in Gaza is impacting me. It's a trigger from my generation, you know what I'm saying? From my people to see how America's forces are trying and what they're in their hand in what they're doing. Now, I'm not here to talk about politics in this sense, but I'm just talking about the definition and how that's being, um, um, you know, um, I guess what engaged and how you're trying to take over a society that what I'm saying, like and buying land and
Yes,
tell them renaming different parts of the world and telling me you're going to be the 51st state. I mean come on, you know what I'm saying? But just when you
yes.
think about that on the simple level, and then you have levels to this. So not just
Mhm.
my day-to-day work and what I may engage in, who I may engage in, right? But then when I get home, I'm seeing levels to this. And
Yeah.
also within our communities as well. It filters
And-
within our own community and becomes a divisive tool that the oppressor has implicated upon our own communities.
Yeah.
And so,
I want to highlight that statistic that popped up in that the APA, and this was a study from the
yes.
previous year. This is a study from, I think, 2023, said that
Hmm.
67% of Black Americans report racial discrimination as a significant source of stress in their lives. And of course, now we can say that that is higher.
Right, it
That is
is.
absolutely higher because, yes, we had that period of reconciliation after George Floyd and in 2020, but we are now facing backlash and people are losing jobs and people that, I think it's very interesting that as Black women and coming behind us also Black men have become some of the most educated in our society, that suddenly education is not enough. Years of experience is not enough. Competency in the job and the role is and good communication skills. Like we know that just to be in the spaces that we're in and be successful, we have often had to prove ourselves more. And so when
Yes.
you have to prove yourself, that tends to hone your skill set.
Yes, it
Mhm.
does. Yes, it does. But it also can be tiring,
Tiring,
worn out,
burnout.
burned
Yeah.
out,
What
you
is that?
know?
What does that feel like?
Oh, well, for many of us, it can feel like having headaches, trying to sleep it off. It's our body's way of talking to us, is how I describe it. Headaches, stress, like heart beating fast, night sweats, heart racing, not eating or overeating, not sleeping, oversleeping, not wanting to get out of bed, having
Mhm.
decreased interest. I mean, I'm talking about clinical features of a mental illness because
Yeah.
that's often what it can become when you're not pouring back into yourself. It's one thing to being able to have the energy, the drive, the background, the support to go forward and be
Mhm.
successful. It's another thing when you're constantly having to be in that mode that you can't balance, and you're taking care of everybody. You haven't even taken care of yourself. It's always last. You know what I'm saying? You're putting out fires that are not even yours, that you didn't even start. And so, layers, layers. And that's
Mhm.
why it's so important, especially for double minorities like ourselves, to be able to express this so that people understand it. We're not
Mhm.
complaining when we express it. We're not complaining when we say no. We're just tired.
Yeah. Yeah, and
And
it's
really,
okay to be
and it's
tired. It's okay to
okay.
rest. It's okay to set boundaries,
That's
right?
right.
But we
That's right.
also can't it's this difficult balance, right? Because on the one hand, like,
Yeah.
listen, I ain't gonna lie, after the election, I was like, Faithful,
Right.
you're gonna find as our representative Jasmine Crockett say, you about to feel it. You gonna
Oh yeah,
understand
girl.
soon
We out here.
what this
Yes.
is. But
Come on.
that also is a space where we can't afford to completely disconnect,
Of course
right?
not. We got children. We have ourselves. We still
Right,
right.
right. But at the so
And
let's
there's
talk a
distinctions
little bit.
within us too, though.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So let's
Within us.
talk a little bit about that because I think one of the things that helps me, at least, is to reset on the concept of where these emotions and these sensations come from, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because a question for you and question for the audience. You all can respond in the comments with this, but I'd like for you to also answer this question for me, Dr. Dawn. When you were growing up,
Hmm.
where were you taught that emotions come from? Or was it
Yes.
talked about at all? Did
Mhm.
anybody specifically explain it? Where were you
Yes.
taught emotions come from?
From my parents, I come from a two-parent home. They were college sweethearts, and they were intentional. And I spoke with I was talk, already we've had this conversation
Mhm.
because in mental health, many people don't even know their family history. So, do they talk about emotions? Do they talk about their medical conditions? Do they talk about what happened when this, a traumatic incident? So I say that it came from my parents. My parents were the first individuals that taught me emotions, taught me what healthy loving is, not
Mhm.
just, to someone else or with someone else, but for myself.
So
I
let
witnessed
me
it
ask
as
you,
well.
did you all specifically did they talk about where they're actually generated from? I know they did. They had to have done a great job with you all because they made multiple psychiatrists. So I'm like
That was happenstance, right?
you came from some good stuff, some good stock. So it sounds like they had deliberate conversations with you about it.
They
So
did.
that's a wonderful thing.
They
But when
did.
I ask this question, most people talk they when they say what they were taught growing up, it might be emotions come from your heart,
Gotcha.
uh, emotions come from your gut. They might say mind,
Yeah.
but
My
a
mom
lot of
did.
times it's other people or
Yeah.
God or the
Mhm.
devil. So
Mhm.
we get lots of different
We
answers
do.
when
We
we ask
do.
where do emotions actually come from.
No,
And
that's
so,
great.
go
And
ahead.
so for my family, the main source was from God.
Hmm.
And my mom, who was actually a PhD, she actually knew more about the mind and what, the amygdala and all of that.
Hmm.
But that wasn't necessarily the primary kind of conversation behind it. It started with God. God is love, the spirit, the scripture, and
Hmm.
how God defines love and how we're supposed to be amongst others. So primary spirituality, primary
Yeah.
spirituality. And of
I
course,
would
the
say the
heart
same
and
for
the
me growing
soul.
up. Yeah.
Mhm,
If it was
mhm.
good as God, if it's the devil, well, sometimes it's, if it's fear or whatever, it's also God, but then sometimes it's the devil or
Right.
demons or other things
Mhm.
like that. So the reason that I asked that question, and again, for those who are viewing this, I'd love for you to put in the chat what you were
Mhm.
taught, where you were taught emotions come from growing up, is because there is a specific answer that science has taught us in the last 10, 15, 20 years, but that has not been whenever new discoveries are made, First of all, the first people to make them, we think they're crazy, right? We, they were all on what was that,
You heard this
Copernicus,
before.
when he said that the earth is not the center of the universe. It stone him.
Right.
Now we know
Woo.
that not only are we revolving
Okay.
around the sun, but the sun is running through the Milky Way with us spiraling behind it, right?
That's
So
right.
when it comes to how we think about emotions, we still have a very outdated thought process about the
Mm-hmm.
fact that all human beings, our emotions come from our brain, specifically from our amygdala, which is a part of our limbic system, and it's a part of our animal biology. Because
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I always like to tie it together to understanding that you can't understand your mental health fully without understanding that you are an animal. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
you're a human, and your spirit. You're all three of those things equally. And so you have biology that affects and dictates your psychology and the invisible surges and urges that you feel day to day, that we call depression, anxiety, stress, PTSD, bipolar disorder, dementia. We got all these names for when these certain cluster of behaviors come out, but at the end of the day, all mental health is from the brain.
Mm-hmm.
All human beings have emotions 100% of the time. Even when
Mm-hmm.
we're asleep, our
Yeah,
brain is generating emotions
that's
and
right.
things that are processed in our system. So it's
Mm-hmm.
more crucial than ever, I believe, for us to break this stigma of thinking that mental health is something like in your head, or something that comes from your heart or your gut. We
Yeah.
need to understand it as our brain processing and then sending signals through our body that we then experience, maybe in our chest with the tightness, or in our stomach
Yeah.
with the growling, or in our shoulders, or our fatigue, and the
Mm-hmm.
all the symptoms that we talked about earlier. That's happening because biologically things are changing on the inside of you as you are experiencing that painful thing, as you have that loss of your possessions from a fire, or that
Yes. Yes.
extreme political circumstance that's happening. Your body's experiencing that horror. You wanted
That's
to say
right.
something? Go ahead, Doc.
No, no, you hit the nail right on the head. You're exactly right, girl. And I find that when you do start there, it normalizes it. It really
Mm,
does. Because I think that people also are misinformed or have a misunderstanding of the difference between mental health and mental illness. And because
mm,
of that misunderstanding, they feel, oh, well, I'm not depressed. I'm not anxious. I'm not bipolar. I don't, you know what I'm saying? And so
mhm.
they just shy away from even just acknowledging that they have mental health. And
Mhm.
and I'm just talking about the superficial, and then you can talk about like you're saying emotions and executive function, cognitive function, all of those things underneath that.
Yeah.
But I think it's so important that you express that because we all, we all have these things in our brain, all of us, all of us. Sometimes
Yeah.
overdrive, no, sometimes not, underperform, but we
Underdriving,
all.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And for those of us who have these busy brains, who are already likely challenged with keeping up with all the things that are going on in the day, I usually offer this concept, right? That, the earth is what we say 4 billion years old,
Yep.
and human ancestry, maybe some millions. And then we're talking about organized human society for the last tens of thousands of years. And so, in the grander concept of things, this human body has been very similar or the same for thousands of years.
That's right.
But our technology in the last 100 years has exponentially changed, has
Mm-hmm.
gone up so much that what we could do in 2025 compared to 1925, we have electricity lighting our homes year
Mm-hmm.
round. We have indoor plumbing. We have cars that zip us around, and planes that jet us all over the globe. And because of the way technology has advanced so quickly, we're asking so much of our body, our mind, to do things that the human body again, this is not healing from the trauma of slavery, where we still think of human beings as cogs in a wheel. You don't have value unless you have a job that's producing income and taking care of a family, or you don't have value unless you fit the clothing a certain size, or you're able to produce a certain thing. We have
Mm-hmm.
very much developed a culture that easily allows us to dehumanize each other, and that's how we get to this political trauma.
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
exactly right. I can't say anything after that.
And
You connected those
people like,
dots.
Doc, it's so heavy. Why are you laughing? I'm like, it's you have to laugh to keep from
You
crying.
do. Well, it's a mature defense, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
listen, you have to.
yeah. But in some ways, it is kind of funny to me, because if you think about this, because we have not prioritized mental health and have in fact stigmatized, this is kind of like the last frontier to me, because
Mm-hmm.
we talked about gay rights, we talked about so
Yeah.
many things, racism even,
Sex and
we
well, yes,
talked about
yes,
dinosaurs, we,
yes.
we talked about all these hard things, we're talking about religion.
Mm-hmm.
But the last frontier is us breaking through this concept that mental health is for somebody else.
I
Even
get
when we
it.
talk about mental illness, it's just on a dial. Like
It is.
you may be doing fine today, but you probably have gone through spells and episodes of things where your brain
Right.
is not functioning as well as it could. And so
Exactly.
it's so important that we understand that, like, it's okay to acknowledge these things.
It
I can't. It
is.
makes it so hard to get off
And
that
if it
point.
makes it simple to acknowledge if it's fair, good, or poor, let's start there. On a day to day, how does your mental
Mhm.
health feel today, Dr. Alana? Would you say fair? And when I'm talking about mental health, I'm talking about your activities of daily living, sleeping,
Yeah.
eating, right? Eating, exercising, like just kind of how you're able to maintain your mood regulation, emotional regulation, your cognition, your executive functioning, learning, adapting, going about your day. That's how we can rate it. Because a person who has depression can have good mental health, and a person who does have a mental illness can have poor mental health. So again, if you have to start, and I love how Dr. Lana always starts with definition. You got to define what mental health, the difference between that and mental illness is, so you can recognize. I may have a history of ADHD, and I have ADHD, and my mental health today is good. And if it's poor, what do I need to do in order to make sure that it becomes better? And that will allow you
Yeah.
to self-care, self-manage, say no, say yes to saying no. Like it just puts everything in line for you when we take care of it. And you're exactly right. It
So what are
always is
some of
about the
those?
back.
I'm sorry. It
Oh no,
glitched
you're
for me.
fine.
What are
Yes.
some of those steps that you tell people, that some of those practices that they can do in their daily routine
Mhm.
to help them kind of feel healthier and organize their efforts?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the basics. Having a healthy regimen of sleep. And I start with sleep because I always tell my patients that's my worst villain. I always work against someone's sleep. That's the villain in psychiatry. If you're not sleeping well, everything is not going to be well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your
I
mood, your mental clarity, your mood, how you regulate your mood, how you feel, your emotions. I mean, everything is
How do
going to
we
be
get
off.
better sleep though? Because it's so hard to cut off that phone. It's so hard to.
Mhm.
I shouldn't even say it's hard, but it's an addiction, like everything else. Let me go ahead and be the patient today and admit it that it's me. I'm the problem.
I'll be
Uh,
working on mine too. Don't listen. I'm working on. You have to create healthy boundaries. First of all, you have to establish a better relationship with your sleep. Let's start there. Acknowledge that you have a very poor relationship with your sleep, and so you're willing to understand it, work on it, find ways to manage it so that you can improve it. And
yeah,
so when you
we grew up hearing "sleep when you're dead," get
uh,
and things like that, right?
I ain't got time to feel. I got to keep going. And,
Yeah,
and all these things that were taught to us, we're taking them literally. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Because, okay, just think of naturally what you have to do, what you can't avoid. I would say there's two things for sure, but there's really three. I would say sleep, eat, and the third is exercise in my book. We
Mm.
cannot avoid any of those categories, right? We have to do it as human beings. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to do it. The first, like as a psychiatrist, I prescribe medicine, but guess what? Even before I even get to medicine or even recommend it, I'll
Yeah.
always talk about the basic activities of daily living. And one of those crucial ones is sleep. So turn stuff off. Maybe I always say trick your brain. So if your bedroom's upstairs, set your alarm. Get a loud alarm. Remember those timers, the kitchen timers? Like
Mm-hmm.
even those, set that upstairs because I'm less likely going to come back downstairs. You know what I'm saying? Like behavioral
Yeah.
management matters when you're talking about sleep hygiene. You need to first understand how much sleep is recommended by your doctor. So for
Yes.
adults, generally speaking, 7 to 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. I know the latest studies are showing that if you have disrupted sleep, that it's not necessarily negative, but I don't know. These were case reports that I'm like, I need more studies on that. From what
Mm-hmm.
our from what I know, because as a psychiatrist is important, is that when you sleep sustainably and when you're in that REM sleep, so when you're actually your mind is dreaming, you don't have to remember it, but if you're dreaming yeah, I know that you're probably getting that REM sleep and you don't remember waking up. That's good. That's good, and you feel refreshed the following morning. That's good. That's good. Now,
Yeah.
there's different things that contribute to that, though. So I don't want to just say that's directly only connected to sleep, right? Because
Sure.
someone could be iron deficient or vitamin D deficient and not feel refreshed in the
Right.
morning. But
Exactly.
make sure healthy boundaries. So don't plan anything, right? Maybe exercise to no more than 2 hours before you sleep, because again, when your mind is on, your body's on. When any part of your body's on, let me rephrase that. When your body's on, your mind is always going to be on because it controls your body. So why are you
Yeah.
eating at night, right? Why are
Yeah.
you exercising late? Why are you watching TV? All that stimulation.
Yeah.
And so it
It's
is
that
important.
doggone dopamine, y'all. It always it comes back to this, how much our body likes the stimulation and likes
Yes.
the sensation of dopamine. That's that brain reward
Hmm.
system, that fourth brain system that I like to talk about. Let me catch one thing
Yeah.
that you said though, because sleep, exercise, um, healthy diet, those are all things that can help you stay focused and on top of your game in all of this space. But what about for the people who are like, I have so many things at stake right now. I'm upset about abortion rights. I'm upset about immigration things. I'm upset about educational system. I'm upset about how federal
Mhm.
workers are treated. Like, how can they prioritize or find, what's a practical thing for them to do? Because we can't even tackle all the things. I'm planning
Yeah.
boycotts and other things.
Okay.
So how do we keep from being overwhelmed with all the things that it seems like we need to do to address this
Yeah.
shenanigans?
Yeah, I have about 5 things. So one, you want to limit the news consumption. And what I mean by that is, you want to stay informed, but don't feel overwhelmed about it, right?
Mhm.
So set specific times like for news updates, rather than just checking in constantly. I read my news versus watching it because that's a
Mhm.
trigger for me if I see someone being assaulted, for
Right.
example.
Yeah.
Not that I was, but I'm an empath, so I feel that. And
Yes.
on top of
Your
my
brain
feeling,
your brain records it, right?
and it
Like, if
records
you
it.
see an
Yeah,
imagery of something, your
yeah.
brain is going to record it. So
Mhm.
controlling how you intake the data, that's a really good point. Any other,
Yeah,
you were mentioning some other things.
yeah, and if it's hard for you to do that, just think about controlling what you eat. For us that are just on this realm of wanting to diet, you control what you put in your gut, you gotta control what you put in your mind. And so maybe reading something positive, something
Mhm.
uplifting. That's why spirituality for many people or positive affirmation has been so helpful in protecting and managing their mental health because it
Mhm.
keeps them the hope, the sense of Lord is listening to my prayer, praying,
Yeah.
meditating. Those things can definitely reinforce that, yes, God hears your prayers. You're not alone. You're going to get through this. He's here to protect you. And control the conversation, set boundaries around those conversations. If you know that your friend has different political views than you may not necessarily want to have involve yourself in those conversations if the reaction response is going to be negative for you. and it's hard to
Mhm.
manage. So decide when, where, and who you want to discuss these politics with.
Mhm.
It's okay to say, I'd rather not talk about this right now,
Yeah.
you know, and
And not
politely
only
get things
that,
done.
but think about or plan for ways that there are some times where you do want to have that conversation. So
Right.
we talk about setting
Hmm.
boundaries, but there's
Hmm.
also a way. That's why I teach the dear man skill. If y'all are familiar with dialectical behavioral therapy or DBT, I
Hmm.
love the dear man skill, and it's always something that I coach my clients on, because then they are prepared to address when they do need to, because sometimes like it's important enough that it needs to be a conversation within the workplace or with a colleague or with somebody
Hmm.
that you can't just drown out or box out. It's a
Yeah.
husband or a family
Hmm.
member that you're close to, where you have to be able to navigate that. So that's the reason I
Right.
teach those communication skills, so that they can feel prepared and confident. Planning
Yeah.
ahead and practicing
Man,
skills
that's
is
it. You got to
such
plan it.
yeah, you wouldn't go give a work presentation without writing it out, thinking what you're going to say, practicing saying it. In these difficult conversations, especially related to politics,
Right.
sit down and write it out. Plan out what
Definitely.
needs to be said.
Yes.
Practice or even model it with another person and ask them to respond how you think the person would respond, so you can practice being deliberate and
Hmm.
effective, so that you actually achieve expressing yourself and can walk away from it feeling good about how you handled it. Not
That's
flying
it.
off the hook, or not saying what's important to be said in the moment. So
That's right.
anybody who comes to the
That's
Trauma
right.
Cure, my educational event, you will be taught about Dear Man and how to use it, because it comes
Yeah.
in so handy when they come with that foolishness. Bah, 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 no, no, ma'am, no, sir.
I
So
love
that's
it.
definitely, you mentioned another thing that I wanted to come back to. We
Hmm.
talk about decluttering, and whenever your brain feels scrambled, I
Hmm.
won't just say ADHD, because a lot of people under trauma and stress, your
Hmm.
brain, you have more cortisol in your system, your thought processes can be more cloudy. Your
Right.
When you're fatigued or tired, or feeling the drag of all these things happening, you might be more messy than usual, not just
Hmm.
in your mind, but in your physical space. So can you
Oh
speak
yeah.
a little bit about how, like, clearing out clutter in your physical
Yes.
space can
Yeah.
help you?
I know this all too well because having moderate ADHD, I recognize that this is a day to day, functioning, not just taking medicine, but behavioral management. So one of the identifiers that my mind is cloudy, even if that I'm desensitized to that, is I look at my closet. So my
Mm,
closet's messy. That's usually for my ADHD. Okay, I need to get things in order. So
mhm,
reorganizing, yes, saying no, prioritizing self-care, getting enough sleep, eating better, exercise, finding ways to calm, yoga, going out with the girls,
mhm,
exercise, meditation. Those things are going to be helpful to kind of get back first before you reorganize. So you kind of just woosah,
mhm.
and then have a plan. So I got my 4 P's for my ADHD or my executive functioning coaching. So you want to plan. Planning is the key. If I say it's a special sauce, it's my special sauce, because
Mhm.
having a lot of roles, or like yourself, Dr. Lana, where there's you're trying to declutter and all these things, you got to plan. And if you can plan it out to where it doesn't become overwhelming, and it's manageable and it's realistic, you're likely going to hit those goals. But don't
Yeah,
cheat. Don't cheat yourself, because we ought to put 20 things on the list on a Monday, and we set
yeah,
ourselves out. We look at that list and then we feel defeated. And I'm like, well, what human is going to be able to manage all that? Number one is 5 steps. So you got 20. You know
yeah.
what I'm saying? But plan it out when it's
We're
realistic.
trying to operate in a way that our bodies were not designed to operate. Like, the way
Ooh,
that the
yes.
amount of things that our system is trying to manage day to day is truly
Yes.
not the way humans are designed to be healthy.
No, but what you said, I want to go back to what you said, because knowing and understanding the brain, if you know and understand the brain, and what Dr. Alana, for the emotion, me for the executive function, for example, we are able to better guide you, because now that we're operating from with the heart, because we know emotions don't come there, but we're operating from the mind and the brain, where we telling you, planning, prioritizing, producing, like we know what it takes to
Mhm.
get there, because
Yeah.
now we understand where it comes from. And I love that you pointed that out. I think that was a great question to ask, How did you learn about emotions? Because that's how we learn about task initiation, task completion. How do I go about a task? Those type of things. But I don't want to digress, but those are the things that are important. That self-care is important. And I also want to say this: controlling social media exposure. I know I said like limit the news, but sometimes when you kind of just scrolling, it's hard because you got all these images, planes, not necessarily, all these images in front of you
Yeah.
that you can't avoid, right? And it's hard. So, sometimes you just got to block certain things that you find that are repetitive. Maybe block that account.
Yeah.
Take breaks. I think Instagram has a great way of how long you looked at social media.
Mhm.
Use those
Use
tools.
yours, yeah, use the tools that are built
Yes.
in to help control it, 'cause, yeah, you can set your do not disturb and your sleep, your,
Yep.
sleep cycles in your phone a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
You can I think it's the awareness that
It's
is
the
so
awareness.
important, especially
It
for the
is.
Black community while we are going through such a trying time to reject our emotions and to act like, dopamine does make us feel good. So there is some, even though you're watching a horrific news or you're getting a social media video that's, the drama, that's hitting your brain in a way that's like,
Hmm.
ooh, yeah, give me some
Yes.
more of that. Even though it might affect you negatively the next day when you're walking around because your brain has now seen that person being harmed or that thing and
Yes.
desensitized you to
Yes.
things. So
Yes.
it's such a important concept beyond the self-care that once you've organized your physical space, organize your psychological space. So that
Hmm.
starts with being willing to admit that you might need some help. We have mental health practitioners such as Dr. Dawn, who can treat, but also therapists and
Hmm.
other licensed mental health practitioners. It's just not the same talking to your friends and your family. They're going to operate on the same concepts of trying to make you feel better, and they don't want you to feel bad, and they tell you don't think like that. But
Right.
there's a reason why we go through so much training and education, because there are science-based approaches. And when
Yes.
you hear yourself talk these things out to an objective person, like telling your story is powerful. And
Yes,
that
it
might not even
is.
always look like seeing a professional, but for those who can't get to that, get in some space where you can tell your story in a supported environment. That might look like AA. That might
Yes.
look like a just a group of people that you bring together in your neighborhood. That
Mm-hmm.
might be a survivor support group for whatever it is that you're struggling with. But being
Hmm.
around people with shared experiences also helps put in front of you, what can I do to the causes that are so important to me? How can I fine tune my energy? I would say make
Hmm.
a list, in fact, of the things
Hmm.
that are most important to you. Pick the
Hmm.
top three, and then star the one that you want to start with in terms of the put your money, or make phone calls, phone banking, or
Hmm.
do whatever else you can to research how you can support a particular cause. That
Yeah.
way you can not feel so overwhelmed by all the political stuff, but know that you're making progress in
and
some space.
and that's tangible, right? It's we're making tangible impacts when we're doing that. And like you're saying, that's firing off the
Mhm.
dopamine, the volunteerism, the supporting the cause you believe in. You're giving back, even just with yourself. Allow yourself to have a bath, take yourself on a date, positive
Mhm.
affirmations. I mean, just give, treat yourself. I always tell my patients, treat yourself before the day's end.
Yeah,
It's important that we reward ourselves and our efforts too, just getting through one more day.
yeah,
And that also increases motivation, drive, and hope that the next day will be just as better, or we're going to conquer it. So I think those are really good, healthy ways to do it. Now, I also
mhm.
recommend on social media, follow dogs accounts because
Mm,
there's been research on that shows when you're following animal accounts and they're doing something goofy, that dopamine is just like whoosh.
yeah,
I mean, it is spiraling out of control. I really looked into this because I
okay.
found myself just like, wow, like at the end of my day, I'm seeing 30 people a day, and I just want to see, just kind of
Yeah, something
decompress.
nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
I have my dogs. I got my dog, my
So
own
be
personal
it
dog. I have my
so
dog accounts.
What
Yeah.
I hear is being intentional about balancing the negative with positive.
Yes, that's so
Our
important.
brain is geared towards the negative, and
Mm-hmm.
our brain is specifically, I talk about
It
the
is.
reticular activating system. Whatever you're putting in your brain starts looking out for it and honing your attention on things that may indicate that thing is going to happen again or to help you prevent from it happening again. So that means if you're consuming a lot of crime podcasts and a lot of political stress and drama, your brain is going to be hyped up on those things. So it not
Mm-hmm.
only is it important to set the limits in how you get it, but also fine tuning to make sure that you're balancing out with positive dopamine. Today,
Yes.
we have given you so many things. It's probably a little bit overwhelming in terms of how many small pieces we've given you that add up to big changes when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to being able to manage your mental health during this really turbulent time. And one of the things that I do not want to forget is that one of the things that to me is so missing in our time is mental health education. Because if we understood mental health and what mental illnesses are, like if the general population, it drives me up the wall when I hear people say, oh, the weather's so bipolar, or, she's so OCD and that kind of stuff. My OCD is messing up. And they're using those phrases
Or my
incorrectly.
ADHD.
Right. It's my
Yeah, all the
ADHD, right?
time.
Exactly. So
Yes.
stop it because you are not your diagnosis and no one is their diagnosis. It's just a manifestation of their brain and their biology
Yeah.
causing behaviors. But if we truly had a understanding of what mental illnesses are, we would not give the reins of our society to extraordinarily mentally ill people. A person
Mm-hmm.
who cannot process information and see the experience of others is they may be successful in business because corporations value being able to disconnect from the individual person and make the hard decision to make,
Yes.
to make
Yes.
more money. But
Yeah.
that also puts leadership in a bubble of perception where
And
they
who can be in
choose
control.
not to or can't, right, who cannot see the individual person. And it's a delusional state to
Yes, it is.
operate around other human beings and not be able to appreciate the experience of those people unless they have some value to you. That is illness. So if we knew how to recognize dementia, if we knew how to recognize how a narcissistic personality disorder would cause chaos and even trauma, PTSD, and other things like that, we are witnessing the culmination of all of those things in one very damaged person. So
Yes,
to
we are.
me, mental health and the average person not understanding their brain, it's a public health emergency.
Yes, it
I
is.
want to I want to hang from the
Yes.
ceiling, pull out my my
Yes.
bullhorn. Is there a global mic somewhere? Is this thing on? Is this thing?
Come on.
Mental illness is real,
Come
and
on.
mentally, dementia, frontotemporal dementia is real.
Woo-hoo. Yes, it is.
um, so when we're talking about politics, you
That's it.
need armed with information that informs and that helps the other people actually have a real conversation about
Mm-hmm.
what's at risk when our leaders and decision makers are trapped in their amygdalas with their greed and their power and their control addictions. And we are all experiencing the very real trauma of being ignored, being dehumanized, and being damaged. So, with
Yes.
that, we're going to end this episode today. Dr. Dawn, thank you for
Yes.
coming. Tell them
Thank you
where
for
they can find
having
you on
me.
social media. What's your
Yes.
handle?
Dr. Dawn Psych MD. That's DRDAWN, P as in Paul, SYCHMD. Feel free to go there, and there's a hub, and that'll actually connect you to my other two like practices and businesses. Yes.
Awesome. We're so happy to
Thanks for
have you
having me.
here today. And I'm sure we will have more conversations from here. All right, folks. I am Dr. Alauna, trauma psychiatrist. You can find me on social media at DRALAUNA at Dr. Alana, trauma psychiatrist. And we have the early bird tickets going for the trauma cure. The next trauma cure is April 5th and 6th. It is my live virtual event. You spoke and we listened. We changed it from a 3-day to a 2-day event. So it'll be 9 to 5 Central Standard Time, where I'll be breaking down for you these concepts and really getting to the why. Not just that we have these challenges in society, but where are they coming from? It's coming from our brain. So not only that, I give you a skills over pills approach where you're able to use cognitive tools to help self-regulate your body, your brain, and your behavior. So check out thetraumacure.com, and thank you for joining us today on Demystifying Mental Health. We are your place to get mental health information in on blackdoctor.org. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.